Punisher, Season 2, Episode 10, The Dark Hearts of Men.
I hear a lot of people saying the blues, but I'm gonna tell you what the blues is. When you ain't got no money, you got the blues. When you ain't got no money.
Welcome back, fellow Defenders. This is Defenders TV Podcast, Episode 216, about The Punisher, Season 2, Episode 10, The Dark Hearts of Men. I'm one of your hosts, Derek.
Hi, I'm one of your other hosts, John.
And rounding out this fabulous trio, I'm Chris.
Welcome back, Chris. We missed you last episode.
Yes, unfortunately, the actual paying day job whisked me away to other countries.
Nice.
But I'm back now, at least for the next week and a half.
Well, it's good to have you back, and for an excellent episode.
Yeah, no, this was definitely something.
Yeah, it really was.
I don't want to spoil it.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
We're going to get into our spoiler-filled thoughts about this episode. Make sure that you've obviously watched episode 10 and all the episodes beforehand. I presume you're going to watch all the episodes beforehand, but make sure you've watched all of them before you listen to the rest of the podcast. If you haven't subscribed to the podcast, as usual, you can subscribe over at our website at defenderstvpodcast.com. And if you want to share your thoughts about any of the episodes, we want to hear from it. We've only got 4 more episodes left of The Punisher, so we want to hear your thoughts. So go over to our website and leave us a voicemail, defenderstvpodcast.com. Or, of course, email us at feedback@defenderstvpodcast.com.
Yes, without further ado, on to our spoiler-filled review. Derek, what are some of the episode details for Episode 10, The Dark Hearts of Men?
Well, the episode was once again written by Steve Lightfoot, the showrunner of the show, and Angela Damana. Angela Damana has been on the show since the beginning of Season 1. She wrote Scar Tissue earlier this season as well, and last season it was Episode 9. She did Front Towards Enemy. A really interesting one. I'm going to say this now. I was meant to say it last episode because Steve Lightfoot also joined the writing credits for last episode. It did feel a little bit like the showrunner of this show set up so much in those first 2 episodes with the introduction of John Pilgrim, the Man in Black, as we were calling him at the time, and the family of the Schultz. And it feels like he got to episode 8 and was going, hey lads, do you want to actually refocus on the bad guy that I set up for you at the beginning of the season? Oh, okay, right. I'm going to actually write some scenes about that character to bring him back in to make sure the season isn't also about Billy Russo again like Season 1. It just feels like he kind of took the reins back from his writing staff. I know that's not how it works in the writer's room, but the showrunner always gets the criticism if a show goes off the rails a bit, and it just feels like he reined them back in and went, this is what I wanted the series to be about, and that's why he's getting his writing credits right now. What do you guys think?
I don't really know. I mean, it's nice to have that reconnect with the Schultz, and I think... I don't think they would ever say something like that in any kind of official capacity. But to be honest, I just feel it's great to have the showrunner being involved in the writing because, I mean, we've always said that, you know, the start episode, the end episode, most of the Marvel Netflix Defenders has included the showrunner. Writing those sort of, you know, the big intro and the big outro of these series. For me, I don't see any reason why they cannot be writing or co-writing every episode in that sense. I do think that Chio Hodari Coker has, you know, been, or you've felt his touch much more through the season on both his Season 1 and his Season 2 as well. So I didn't really have too much of a problem, but I do think, though, that however it's come about, there has been this reset where we've got the Schultz and the Pilgrim being a bit more front and center.
Yeah, I suppose my complaint for like 5 or 6 episodes to the point where I was saying if I wasn't podcasting about it, I probably would have turned it off. They've all been solved in the last 2 episodes by bringing back in those characters that were set up at the beginning of the series. The ones that we were going, oh, this is exciting, I really want to see this. And then they just dropped off the face of the earth for the rest of the series, you know. So it feels like Steve Lightfoot getting a writing credit is different from being the showrunner. He is the showrunner. He signs off on every single episode that goes out there. It is his responsibility. But getting a writing credit means he sat down with the writer, broke the back of the story, and put together the characters for that specific episode. So that's why it feels a little bit like he went, all right, I'm taking this back a bit towards what my vision for the series was.
I'm right there with you on this. My worry is it too little too late? Because we've got some further explanation on these characters that were set up at the beginning, but we've got 3 episodes left in order to make you care in that either from an antagonist point of view or protagonist point of view or etc. understand deeper the storyline, and have a satisfying ending. And we've still got to kill off Billy. Like, there's a lot to do now in 3 hours, and I'm starting to feel, if this was any other show, and this was, like, say, 2 episodes earlier, maybe even, I'd be like, I don't think he kind of came in and grabbed the reins again. But I'm starting to think slightly that this might be what had have happened at this point, which is we've spent too much time digging back into Billy. We need to go back to what the original vision for this season was.
Yeah, absolutely.
What was probably supposed to happen was Billy was going to be the tertiary or secondary kind of villain, and that the Pilgrim was the primary. And I think what ended up happening is they've kind of wandered, and that's ended up flipping.
I think if that's definitely the case, where he was, a tertiary kind of character in this, or as you say, a secondary villain, well, then there has been a little bit of wonder here on the writing, and it is good for Steve Lightfoot to pull it back, or indeed Steve Lightfoot and Angela Lamanna and Ken Christensen previously. I think, but that would be, it's a little concerning, because I do think, like you, Derek, I kind of started to just kind of lose a little bit of focus and interest in it, where it was focused so much on the main antagonist from season 1 in terms of Billy Russo, and also drawing out his and Dr. Dumont's kind of storyline. This episode, we got a really nice moment here with Dr. Dumont, and I really that could have happened earlier for me as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, these are obviously just opinions based on the fact that the credits for Steve Lightfoot have been brought into episode 9 and 10. Normally, we don't see the showrunner appear unless they are taking the full reins of the show, like we saw in Defenders. But just interesting to see what's going on here. I think it's the right choice to refocus the episodes. While I know Billy's great, and while I know that Ben Barnes is a wonderful actor and he's doing a brilliant job on this show, it just feels like they've given way too much of the show over to that character when there's so much else they could be talking about. Anyway, great to have Angela Lamanna back as well on the show. Another person back who we absolutely love now. I'm going to put it out there, guys. I think this might be one of the best Defenders directors. Alex Garcia-Lopez, the director who did the excellent episode of Daredevil Season 3 with the 10-minute prison fight, the guy who came up with that idea, and then also that season did the Karen Page flashback episode that both myself and John called out as one of our favourite episodes from the season in Daredevil Season 3. I have to say, the minute I saw his name come up, I kind of sat back in my chair, relaxed, and went, this is going to be a great episode.
Yeah, right there with you. He's making a name for himself as a very versatile director who can actually do the more character-driven pieces, but then really come for gold when it comes to these action pieces. So in this episode, and obviously Daredevil, and then that Karen Page flashback was the character-driven kind of style. So he's very versatile, but very strong at what he does.
Yes, watch for him to make that jump to showrunner at some time in the future. Maybe not on the Marvel Netflix shows, but maybe on a Netflix show, or possibly on one of the Marvel Plus or Disney Plus streaming service shows in the future.
I think he's been fantastic. I think he's really brought a distinct style to the stuff that he's done on the Marvel Netflix universe, really. So, really pleased to have him back.
Yeah. Well, John, do you want to tell us what they gave us with your synopsis for the episode?
Sure. A vicious fight with his former neo-Nazi gang members leaves Pilgrim with multiple injuries. He's not just bruised, battered and broken, but is dislocated, slashed, and has teeth in his forehead. The brutal encounter pushes him back into old habits, though, as he falls back into drugs, prostitutes, and alcohol during his recovery, and he begins to doubt his divine purpose. Elsewhere, as Dina Madani and Dr. Krista Dumont debate the merits of who's worth saving over wine, and more wine, Frank, along with Curtis, stake out and prepare to storm Billy Russo's base, Valhalla. Little do they know that in turn they are being watched. Frank and Curtis enact their plan against Russo, and blood ensues. In the gunfight, as Frank hunts down Russo, he blindly fires on an office in Valhalla, killing 3 innocent women, and Curtis is traumatized by killing one of the former veterans. As the police arrive, Frank is rocked by guilt, and we discover the work of Dr. Dumont behind the events that played out. To destroy Frank Castle, destroy his sense of moral superiority.
A really, really interesting episode this time. So much great stuff in here. and I know we talked about it just before we went and started recording our podcast. I suppose the biggest line at the beginning of this episode is the idea that this is 24 hours earlier. This discussion with Madani and Dr. Dumont is 24 hours early. We mentioned last episode when myself and John were talking about it, we couldn't see the motivation behind why Dumont was having Madani over to her apartment. We were wondering whether it was something to do with her agoraphobia, that she didn't want to go out the door, and that's why she's stuck inside and has Madani come over. Well, it's not. It's because Billy's listening into the whole thing and waiting for her to break Madani and get the information out of Madani she needs. So we did mention something about that, but didn't get it exactly right. And if you missed that it was 24 hours beforehand, you might not have gotten how important this conversation was, I suppose.
Yeah, it really is important that it's 24 hours, because ultimately this is about the dissection of Frank Castle, and it's done in a way, and I suppose this brings us on to bullet point 1, some free therapy for Madani. This is, you think it's therapy for Madani, and you feel it's a relaxed chat, but at the end, and you're wondering about the motives of Dr. Dumont. I mean, I think thought it was because of the green-eyed monster and jealousy. Yeah, and it seemed as though she was, becoming insecure about him reconnecting with Madani here. Not obviously long-term, but just, he was talking about her all in the forefront of his mind. So you're really wondering what was going on here. And of course, having that 24 hours earlier really plays into this. She was doing undercover ops, really. She was, diagnosing Frank Castle. What is his psychology? Using Madani, who knows both Billy and Frank, in order to get her diagnosis, which she ultimately then reports back in to Billy to enact then his plan to turn around the surprise attack that Frank and Curtis are doing.
Mm-hmm.
I very much assumed bad things were going to happen to Madani constantly through this. I was expecting the wine to be drugged. I was expecting Billy or someone to pop out. I was expecting Dumont to go full on psychotic and attack Madani. I didn't know. I was just constantly expecting something to happen. It was too perfect, and you know what I mean. It was like it was too
relaxed.
Much like it was too relaxed. It was too like an actual session of therapy. And I was just like, no, this is going to go badly, Madani. Get the hell out. I was expecting the cliche of the drugged wine, and then Madani going, what's in it? And stumbling and spilling the wine, and then you seeing Dumont in that kind of hazy camera shot. But then when Madani left, I was like, what? She got what? I don't get it.
How's Billy gotten there?
Yeah, and then so I had missed the 24 hours earlier. So then when Madani leaves and Billy's there, I'm like, what the hell? I'm like, I don't...
Absolutely.
Oh, I'm like, then it kind of all started, and when she goes, I know how to do it, I'm like, okay, it's all coming back to me. Okay, I get it. I see the pattern. Look, this is a really interesting mechanic. When you have a trained psychologist and you want to break people... Well, if your psychologist can give you that insight into the innermost working of your enemy, that whole kind of The Art of War by Sun Tzu, where like the rule is like, know thy enemy. Well, that's exactly what Billy can literally just like send Dumont in and try and find things out, and she will basically find the innermost weak point of each of the... Because she can now take down Madani. She knows how to break Madani, and she now knows at the end of this free treatment session how to break Castle.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a really good, as you say, mechanic to have this angle on how to turn the tables on Frank Castle. I think it's really, really good. Again, like you were saying, Chris, I was half expecting Billy to walk in the door whilst they were having the conversation, because I'd missed the subtitles of the 24 hours later. So I was constantly afraid that Madani was, in this trap, just being kept there by Dumont until Billy Russo comes home, or something else to happen to her. And then, of course, he turns up from the spare bedroom, and I was like having to go like, what's going on here? But even just that interweaving of the different timelines to be in the present and back 24 hours with this couple was really nicely done. You suddenly realize that it's a really clever way of doing it, because as well, the one thing that Billy does know is that Frank will come for him. You know, he is this charging bull, and that's why I kind of like that he uses his knowledge about Frank and then gets his really deep insight into Frank's mental makeup through Madani, so that it's a really nice sort of layered approach to him reversing this surprise attack.
Absolutely, and I really like how Demont describes it, because it's coming from her perspective as well. She's basically saying, when you take away Frank's idea that he's better than you, because you're better than him, Billy, kind of thing. It's like, that's not what Frank feels. Frank doesn't feel he's better than Billy. He feels that Billy's a maniac who needs to be put down. They are two different things, but it's basically taking Frank down to his level, turning him into a murderer who kills indiscriminately, is what Madani's found out. The only other thing about that 24 hours before, I was wondering if that was just an indication of how many bottles of wine it would take to get Madani to spill her guts completely, because they did seem to go through so many bottles. It's like, well, how many hours did Madani actually spend in the presence of Demont? Was it like 6 or 8 hours with, you know, a case of wine that they drank?
It's one of those free-flowing dinner parties where someone just keeps topping up your wine glass, and by the end of it, it's like you're either face down in tiramisu or you're kind of fast asleep on the sofa, because you've just had way too much to drink without really realizing it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm wondering if therapy sessions ever slow down, if they ever need to encourage more people to come over. They could just go with free wine. Come join and have a session of therapy with free wine.
Well, that's it. Loose lips sink ships.
Let's get on to bullet point number 2, guys, because this, I thought, was one of my favourite things that happened within this episode. A broken pilgrim. We saw Pilgrim at the end of last episode getting his real name back. We got the mention of him being called Robbie or Robert last episode by Cusack, the former leader of the gang that he was involved in before he went off and redesigned his life effectively. And we saw him surrounded by the whole gang. And this time we find Pilgrim beating his way out of the bar and killing every single person around him. This is a fantastic fight. And I absolutely have to give total credit to Alex Garcia-Lopez for his shooting of this fight. This is exactly what I was talking about back in the fight with the Russians in the gym, where the camera was focusing on the wrong thing for too long, trying to make it look brutal. In this episode, we absolutely see hugely brutal things, but we see it cutting to Pilgrim in the future taking teeth out of his head, rather than it focusing on the guy losing his teeth and smiling broadly for a couple of minutes at the camera to show you how brutal this was, and the guy actually lost his teeth in the fight. That kind of stuff. It was so well shot and so well put together. I absolutely give the credit here to the director for having this whole flashback sequence of the Pilgrim sitting on his bed, looking at all the wounds he's gotten and flashing back to the actual fight. I thought it was beautifully put together.
Yeah, the interweaving of these different, the during and the after of the fight was really nicely done. And as you say, it kind of added more weight to the fight, because you know, he's got teeth in his forehead, he's been slashed by a knife, he's had his jaw dislocated, he's been beaten, he's bruised and battered. You know, he's taking the drugs to try and numb the pain, he's drinking the booze to numb the pain, and it lends more weight to that fight. You see the hurt that he's going through, and just how it was intercut was really nicely done. Yeah, this was great.
And when he's beating Cusack with the knuckle duster, it focuses on Pilgrim.
Exactly.
It doesn't focus on the tearing of the flesh, the rending, which we saw pretty much in the gym fight scene.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, when I was watching this, I very much thought of you guys, and I thought of what we had discussed before, because this is so different.
Yeah.
It is as violent. Like, he headbutts the guy back again, and that's where the teeth come from.
Yeah.
He gets stabbed, but we don't see it slicing, but we just see him like touching a stab wound.
Yeah.
So it was very well conceived.
Yeah. I think what's really nice about this as well is it bookends this episode. So here you have that moral superiority of the Pilgrim being dashed on the rocks. You know, he's suddenly, he's been in contact with his old self, this brutal encounter with Cusack and the gang, and all of a sudden he's there with prostitutes, liquor and drugs, doubting what he's doing, having these flashbacks to his wife, I mean, it seems like he does pull himself back towards his purpose a bit, but there's certainly, he, has gone from the last episode where he refuses the drink that Cusack offers him to quite enjoying the drink here, possibly just to take the pain away, but he's being exposed to it. Yeah. And I love that kind of degradation of where he came from. And it kind of just reflects towards the end where Frank, with everything that happens to Frank, and how, as we've said with the free therapy session from Madani, how Dumont uses the situation, they construct the situation in order to rob Frank of his superiority.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think it is Pilgrim returning to himself. I'm not too sure whether it's him realizing he's done anything wrong here, actually. He's done exactly the same thing as Frank did when Frank visited his wife's grave. He's created in his mind his wife saying, "It's okay, I'll be here for you when you return after this mission that you're on." It seems like he's created another round of forgiveness for himself for doing the things he felt he had to do, just like Frank did. Created this piece of forgiveness from a wife who's been dead for 2 years, That's it. This is exactly what you talked about, Chris, back in episode 5 or 6, that you wanted to see Pilgrim being the evil version of Frank. You want to see the Russian being the evil version of Frank, sorry. This is the Pilgrim being the evil version of Frank now. We're finally getting the two of these guys being the mirror image of each other. And then we also have Billy as well, of course, being another mirror of Frank. But we already saw that in season 1. So we're finally getting these mirror images of each other between these two characters who both feel they're in the right and both have a family behind them in their minds telling them that what they're doing is okay. We accept you for doing this. It's only one time. It'll be grand, kind of thing.
Pilgrim is closer to Frank Castle than Billy is now. So we see, and we'll talk more about it later, where Billy exacts his revenge later on, or during this episode. He doesn't do the brutal fight.
Mm-hmm.
He's not involved.
Yeah.
He's commanding. Whereas what we see with Frank Castle or with John Pilgrim, or Robbie, I should say. God, so many names in this season.
I know.
It's just like, you know who I'm talking about. They are the violent in on it together. Like, they are the front line. Mm-hmm. Whereas I think Billy is now more... He has ties to Frank. They are related. They are brothers.
Yeah, absolutely.
But they are no longer similar.
Yeah, Billy's changed a lot, and he should have. After season 1 of the show, he should have had a change, even not just losing his memory. There is also a different type of character that we're seeing in season 2. Just wanted to mention that whole bit with the partying businessman next door from Pilgrim, who kind of breaks Pilgrim's thoughts about what's going on, him reconnecting with his wife in his mind, with getting himself drunk on the whiskey and taking the coke. It is interesting that he goes through another round of brutality, I suppose. We don't see any of it at all, but I can only assume from the scene that's left behind in the room that there has been another round of violence from the Pilgrim here. This guy, Bob Wick, is on some kind of book tour. You see a sign in the room and you see a box of books that have his name on them. He's doing that and obviously sleeping with a lot of women around him. Pilgrim pushes himself into the room, gun in the guy's face, and later you see Pilgrim sitting on the bed after having a service from one of the prostitutes that was in the room with Bob Wick, and you see all of Bob's stuff all over the room. You see the sign falling on the floor, you see the box of books turned over with books lying everywhere, so it feels like possibly Bob has been made to disappear in that room. There might have been another round of violence, but we don't see it, and I do think we're probably going to get the answer to that next episode. That's probably going to be where it picks up. We'll find out whether Bob lived or died, or whether he was just kicked out of the room and told to leave his prostitutes and coke and alcohol behind.
Do you think the Pilgrim picked up one of the self-help books and read it just to kind of get him back on track for when he next meets the Schultz?
Maybe. Yes, the books are self-help books from Bob Wick, aren't they?
Yeah. Chicken soup for the soul, or in this case, lots of cocaine for the nose.
Exactly. Well, it is kind of interesting. Obviously, we have Madani and Dumont going through their therapy, and now we have Pilgrim with a self-help guru next door who takes some kind of therapy, I guess.
He receives some therapy, I think.
He does.
Yeah, that was a weird scene. Just seeing like the crying woman look up and then is replaced by his very ill wife, who still looked like she's been crying. So he's imagining her still having cried. So that was the weirder. I'm like, oh, this man is troubled.
Yes,
Capital
big time.
Tru.
But it was phenomenal stuff. I mean, to see this breakdown, I think.
Yeah, it's something that we've wanted to see for episodes, just more development of this character. It is really interesting that we see the flashbacks to him talking to his future wife at the time. He's basically his proposal to her, where he's about to get down on one knee, is, my name's actually not John Pilgrim. I've done loads of bad things. I've killed loads of people. You name the sin, I've done it. And she says to him, well, is that person still inside you? And he goes, I'm kind of afraid that it is. I'm kind of afraid that person is in there. But with your love, perhaps I'll be able to keep it at bay. And she forgives him and agrees to marry him. And here he is, having let all of those sins back out, sitting on the bed wondering, what does he tell his wife, I guess.
And she also says, just finish this so that you can come back to me. So
yes.
it is almost this implicit, I've given you the grace to go forward and be a psychotic maniac. And now come back to me to feed me the chicken soup for my soul whilst, I'm on my deathbed.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I do think it's really just great stuff here. I must say, yeah. Can't really say much more about it. I just thought it was just so good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to see more, and I'm hoping we have enough time.
Exactly.
That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
So, gentlemen, I think unless you have anything else that you want to speak about Pilgrim, I say we move on to our next bullet point.
Yeah, our next bit of therapy, really, between two real best friends, right? Bullet point number 3, another stakeout, Frank and Curtis. I really like this scene. I really like having Frank and Curtis connect together.
Yeah.
They've been so good throughout the season. You got a lot of sense of who Curtis was in season 1. He's the kind of moral core of this group of people. But I kind of like this scene with Frank where he's saying, you're the only person I really ever cared about, Curtis, because you were doing something different than all of the rest of the people that I met in the army. Everybody else there was trained to kill. You were trained to put people back together, which made you special to me as a character. Something that you never hear talked about very often. And I think what is really interesting about season 2 of The Punisher is they've employed a lot of veterans of wars, a lot of veterans of the Gulf War, a lot of people that now work in the industry who have had these experiences. And it feels like you hear their voice come through occasionally in things that Frank says. He says here, at the time when we were at war, I would have laid down my life for any of those men around me. I would have taken a bullet for any one of them. But in the real world, when different things come into play and when they are their normal selves in the real world, I wouldn't lay down my life for any one of them except for Curtis. It's really interesting. It's something that doesn't come out very often when you talk about former veterans of wars.
Yeah, it is. It's the opposite side of that, once a Marine, always a Marine, we've always got your back. This is kind of saying the reverse or the opposite of that ultimately I can stay with you if you're someone like Curtis, or I can just forget about you. And actually, you don't really mean that much to me. It was that situation of having to survive that pulled us together.
Exactly.
One of the other things is Curtis is from a different service, isn't he? He's not a Marine like Billy and Frank. Isn't he something like from the Navy?
No, Curtis was part of the team, but he was the medic on the team. He wasn't trained to kill. He wasn't the guy that was supposed to be going out on the missions. He was there to make sure that they were taken care of if any of them got injured. So he was always so that's why he's kind of been able to patch up Frank reasonably often. I think he patched him up in season 1 before they took him off to Madani's father to get fixed up. We saw Curtis taking care of him in season 1. Okay. There's a little bit of difference. And the other thing that Frank is saying here as well is Billy's using this idea of brotherhood between all of the people who were in the Marines or in the army before. He's using that idea of brotherhood to make them do what he wants them to do. And Frank's saying he'd never get me with that because I don't have that kind of feeling for anybody.
Yeah. Actually, Curtis wasn't a Marine, though. He was the groups. Remember that the Kandahar group was brought together from Air Force, Marines, Army Corps. So I think Curtis, that he's the medic in the Army Corps.
Right.
I did enjoy this. I really did enjoy this kind of conversation. What I'm noticing more and more from this relationship is, oh my God, it's one-sided. Curtis gives so much and Frank takes. But he calls Frank on it. And I'm starting to notice Frank is becoming more reliant on Curtis, if you will. Well, it was just like in that before it was like, Curtis, do as I say. Like, just, you're my friend, you're going to do it anyway. I'm not going to listen to you. Whereas now he seems to be receptive to Curtis's advice and kind of overall discussions.
Yeah. I think possibly where we left Frank at the end of season 1 might have helped that. Remember, the whole season ended off with Frank actually going into therapy for a while, actually going in and joining that help group that Curtis had set up, you know? So perhaps that decision of Frank's at the end of season 1 to allow some help has set him up to have these kind of conversations with Curtis where he is listening to him a little bit. I do know what you mean, though. Without Curtis here, you know, this entire plan doesn't work, right? And the same as the plan to take down Billy outside of the place he was robbing from with all of his gang, that plan wouldn't have worked without Curtis. So Curtis has become much more of a feature of Frank's life this season, definitely. And Frank's saying to him now, this far into the season, that he didn't want him to be involved. Well, he's been involved the whole time. He's been on the run, effectively. He's had to change his address. He's had to have his girlfriend up in a hotel for the last couple of weeks while Billy's been around and while Frank's been around. You know, he's heavily involved here. At least Frank is kind of apologising to him, I guess, but definitely taking a lot from him.
Yeah, I must say it's a really nice moment when Curtis is calling his girlfriend, saying, I'm really full of colds, he's coughing, and Frank has just arrived and is like looking at him just chuckling, sort of giving him hassle because he's having to spin a story to keep her away from this craziness. But I really like that moment where they connect with that as well, because yeah, you're right. Curtis is giving up an awful lot to help Frank.
Excellent. You know, I thought that was him calling in sick to work. I assumed that was him calling into the insurance company that he works for going, I can't come into work. Nobody'd want to catch this disease that I've got, this terrible bout of sickness that I've got. I thought that was the joke, that it's like, 3 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon. How do characters in TV shows always get off work at times when the rest of us are all sitting in our office for another 4 hours? I thought it was just that little joke that you actually have someone calling in sick to work because they're off on a stakeout with Frank. But that's interesting. Yeah, it could be just his girlfriend that he's got.
I think it was. I'm sure it was. But
I know he says to Frank that thing at the end where he just goes to Frank, the rest of us have lives to go back to. When this is all over, I do still need to have a life and I have to make sure it's maintained. We can't just, pay insurance companies. A lot of people don't have someone like you in their life ruining it for them, Frank. I have to kind of take care of my real world around me.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I'm right there with you. I thought it was him calling into work sick. And I was just laughing. I was just like, yeah, I think everyone has looked forward to use a mental health day with work in their careers of life, and you've just gone, what's the quickest way I can get out of work? Yeah, I've got a bug. You don't want to catch it. I'm just sitting on the toilet. Like, it's coming out of both ends. No one wants to be near me. Just give me 24 hours.
What was it? Rampant diarrhea. I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And even Frank going, you even used the voice. That's hilarious. Really good. But what's really interesting here, obviously, and again, connected with that 24 hours later, we know Billy's been watching on the whole time, watching Frank and Curtis, looking over his Valhalla, his club with all of his gang there. Billy's standing directly above them on another building, watching everything they do and watching every move they make, knowing that if he stays there long enough, he'll know what their plan is going to be.
How did they not spot Billy spotting them? Like, that was the bit that I was like, oh, really? Billy was standing there. It's not like he was, like, just poking his eyes up over a ledge to watch.
It's very dark at night.
But he did have a telescopic sight, so he could have actually been quite a way away.
Okay. I was just like, Frank and Curtis is a sniper.
Yeah.
Or has at least good sniping skills.
Yeah.
I was like, really? They're not... okay. All right. I was like, I know where this is going now, but like, all right.
Well, they look at the opposite direction. They're never looking up. They're not expecting anybody to be looking at them. But yeah, they should be checking all 4 points. We see that Frank is very good at doing that when he walks into every single room he walks into.
Yeah.
Frank leaves the building a few times. Curtis leaves the building a few times. They come back up. But I'm assuming that Billy is hiding himself out when there's any moment that they could see him. And we've only seen up there at night. He's wearing all black clothes. He's got black hair and a black beard. He is quite shadowed up on that building. And again, using the telescopic lens as well, watching on. There is that moment, though. I loved how it was put together, where you saw Curtis using the sniper rifle with the sniper's sight down on the building, and then you get the pan back to another, what you think is another sniper sight looking on at Frank and Curtis. So you're thinking, uh-oh, someone's going to fire. And then the camera pans around, and it's actually just a camera in the hands of Billy. He's not got a sniper rifle on them. It's just a camera.
Yeah.
Quite cool.
Yeah.
I really like that.
I did think there was a part where Frank was scoping the during the day, and he looks up at the two towers, and I was like, does he actually know that's where Billy was? Because that's where Billy was, I think. He was on the top of those kind of two circular towers.
Okay.
So I was thinking, does Frank know? Does he? No, so he doesn't, I don't think.
No.
I think it was just, maybe it was supposed to be, he thought that would be a cool place to scope too, but he decided against it.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, alright, okay, not really explained, but anyway.
Yeah. Well, let's get on to the attack then. That is our next bullet point number 4, the attack that Frank has been setting up with Curtis. So kind of an interesting one. We get to a certain time of the night. We have this whole plan that they've come together over the course of the 2 or 3 days. We see Frank obviously is getting a little bit more patient than he was the last time they had to do a stakeout. They've waited 2 or 3 days to see the general way that this gang have been taking care of themselves, that the girls come in at about 10 o'clock. So at about 2:15, the gang are still there. And Curtis sets off the bombs to draw out the guards while Frank goes in through this underground tunnel. Interestingly, we see Curtis laying down cover fire using the sniper rifle. He's not sniping anybody. He's not specifically targeting anybody. He's actually targeting away from them to draw them closer and closer and away from the gate, which makes the final moment for poor Curtis even worse, that he has actually hit somebody. He's hit Philip, one of the crew that was a founding member of Billy's gang. He's hit him in the leg, and he dies from his injuries because of this shot from Curtis. This is a really bad moment for Curtis. He never wanted to be involved in the first place. He's a healer, as Frank has described him, and you can see how broken he is as a character when Philip dies. Yeah,
it's a really nice moment where Curtis is struggling with what he's just done. And, again, he purposefully went for the leg to try and prevent him from dying, but maybe he cut one of the main arteries or veins in the leg or something like that. Or maybe Philip's just a weakling because, the amount of punishment that Frank gets. That's sometimes one of the few things that kind of, it's not that it annoys me, but it's just, the different levels of violence and the ability of the person to survive it, obviously kind of has no real pattern or correlation. It's just, it is very much story driven. But I do like the fact here that, it really has a meaningful story drive here for Curtis.
Yeah.
And again, it's one of those things where it reflects what's happening to Frank in this moment inside Valhalla as well. They're both struggling with what they've just done. And I think that is what's really nice about this. And I think you have these points throughout this episode. And I think that's what's made it really, really interesting, really, really engaging, is that you have these different counterpoints happening all the way through this episode. And I really, really like that. Even with the big kind of audio-visual fight that takes place between Frank and the veteran gang here.
This is fantastic.
It's just a really different way of doing the fight scene and showing this violence. And I think it was really, really nice. And again, it reflects onto the nightmare dreams that Billy has had about the Punisher. This mask, this skull coming out of the darkness in his dreams, and that's what he's trying to do here with Frank. These different face masks coming out and providing punishment on him. So I thought that was really nicely done, for sure.
Yeah,
this scene really reminds me of the alleged techniques used in some of the US torture camps across the world. And again, I'm saying alleged, but it's probably used everywhere. But this kind of high frequency, the kind of high audio disorientation, not knowing, those multiple lamps going on and off with the high music blaring to hide footfalls. It was really interesting.
It really was, wasn't it?
Yeah. It would have been great if it was with Defenders TV podcast.
Yes.
We wouldn't be able to disorient anybody, John.
With big audio of rounding out the group.
And for you to see Frank Castle going, where are they? Why are they making stupid jokes? But it was so interesting to see.
It was. And I like the way, as you said, John, I like that it is mirroring the visions or the nightmares that Billy's been having for the last year. It's like as if he set it up to go, well, this is how I've been seeing Frank in my brain, and Frank is going to be seeing me in his brain. Even though he doesn't throw one punch, he doesn't use a knife, he doesn't have a gun, while Frank is in this room, it seems like entirely his plan with everybody around him. You see that inspirational speech that Billy gives to his gang earlier on, going, I know this is personal for me, but I want to make sure it's for all of us. We're doing this for all of us because Punisher is going to come and kill every single one of you to get to me, so we're going to all have to work together as one to take down Frank. So he gets everybody completely bought into his ideals and his beliefs before Frank arrives. And yeah, I do think this is one of the most visceral scenes that we see. Frank is just taken down by everybody around him, by completely taking away all of his senses, of course. So it is a brilliant plan.
Yeah, and as you said, like, he's taken down hard. And then the scene we get where they're all standing around him, beating him, is reminiscent of like this scene at the beginning where Billy and Frank run through the kind of wall of their fellow Marines. Yeah, it's a strange one. I was expecting it to be like, at least I was expecting Billy to get one swift kind of like the one that knocks Frank out. Or something like that. Yeah. So why? But he doesn't do anything. He just walks off, and I'm like, oh no! You know Frank better than this. It's like, you know.
Well, that's the thing. He does, and watching it the second time, I suppose that makes it even more interesting. Because yes, watching it the first time, you see Billy standing over him, going, "Now, guys, beat him, break him, and then kill him." As he walks away, but that was not actually Billy's plan. Billy's plan is the plan given to him by Dumont, which is break Frank properly. Yeah. Don't just kill him. Make sure he lives with the pain the way that you were supposed to be living with the death of his family. So kind of, I suppose, let's continue on with our bullet points, because bullet point number 5 is the lesson for Frank. Frank does get out of this situation. Again, really interestingly, Billy, like a cult leader, has made all of these guys effectively join his group, knowing that some of them won't be able to make it out. Billy said to them he killed one of their group because he wanted to take a bigger cut of money than any of the rest of them would, and he will do that to them as well. But they're still willing to follow him because they're still believing in the cause of Billy. This whole gang of, as you were calling them, Chris, the jigsaws or the puzzles, as you were saying before. This gang is totally created now, and it feels realistic. It feels like something similar to say, Batman 66, where you used to have the Riddler and his gang and all of the people around him, or the Penguin and his minions. This feels just like a much more realistic version of this. They're all wearing masks. You can't pick out anyone in that room other than Billy, but they are all doing his exact bidding and all willing to lay down their lives for their leader.
Definitely. I mean, as you said, Chris, he's kind of like the commander. Frank is the foot soldier. And here, he's really got his troops in line to effectively lay down their life for him, ultimately. And of course, he's being chased down now by Frank, as most of his team have been killed off by Frank. They've wasted their advantage down in the kind of cellar area, but in some ways that was always part of the plan of Billy. Exactly. Because ultimately what Billy wants to do here is to have Frank kill, or at least think he kills, the innocent people, and to remove that idea that he is somehow different from Billy Russo because he has this moral code where he won't kill other people. In effect saying, you came in here blind, your blind rage effectively has killed these 3 women. And they are on your conscience, not Billy's. I mean, the interesting thing is here we see him shoot this office up with the machine gun, so you do assume that they have been killed by him. But I wonder whether Billy effectively killed them beforehand and ran through there knowing that Frank would be all guns blazing.
Yes.
But again, it's it's an interesting moment because we see him sort of wrangling with what he has seen in there. It's interesting, at one point he does shout out Russo, and that's where I think he possibly feels as though maybe Billy had done it previously, that it wasn't him.
I am right there with you that Billy killed these people. Billy and the Puzzles.
Yeah.
Which sounds like a great band name. It's like
It
Gem
does.
and the
50s band
Gem
name.
and what was it? Gem and the Holograms. Billy and the Puzzles. He completely did this. He completely killed them first and ran through that as a tactical. And it's not until you see that point that you actually understand, okay, why Billy didn't go in for the landing blow, why he knew his guys were going to get killed. He knew Frank was going to take them out and then just ran through because he wanted to break
It's so ballsy, isn't it?
Yeah.
Can I ask a question, though? If Billy has killed these 3 girls, then that does lose the kick of what Dumont is trying to sort of impact on Frank, because Frank will just go, I'm still morally superior because I didn't kill them. It was Billy. So my feeling being is, how do you make the point really stick home other than by Frank killing those 3 women in the office by shooting it up? And I mean, he did shoot it up pretty badly. He really did. It could have been that Billy placed them by the window so that they were assured to be caught in the crossfire. But at the end of the day, if there's any sniff that Billy did do this, well, then maybe that completely undermines what they were trying to do here. That's why I think it's a little bit of a difficult one to call until maybe an episode or 2 later, when possibly if Billy was the one to do it, we probably would get shown that.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that's exactly where we're supposed to be leaving this episode. Is we're supposed to think that that Frank has done it. Frank thinks he's done it at the end of the episode. He doesn't think it's Russo. You hear him with saying, no, wait, over and over again, because he wants to assess the situation before anybody else comes in. He wants to find out, did he do it? Because it seemed like he likely did by shooting through this window blindly, that he likely did kill these women, but he wants to have a second to breathe. That's why he's shouting, wait, and then shouting Russo, as in, get Russo back here so we can work out exactly what happened here. Did he do it? Did Frank do it? It's all a big question. But the NYPD walk in the door while Frank is completely freaking out that maybe he did do this. One of the interesting things just to highlight as well, Dumont is not saying that Frank doesn't want to kill innocent people. Very specifically, she says, or finds out from Madani, Frank doesn't want to kill innocent women and children. It's a very specific thing. I know, sounds weird, but for example, every single person that he's killed on Billy's side are all men, and he takes his gun and puts his gun directly to their brain and blows their brain out. He hasn't killed any women throughout this series or throughout the first series, and because obviously his wife and children were murdered by the gang from Kandahar. He has a specific mental block to women and children. I wonder if you do get a series of Punisher season 3, would you get a female antagonist? Would you get an antagonist that's against Punisher, where he would have to question that choice of his to go after a woman? That would be quite an interesting change for Frank. But here it is, Billy putting 3 female prostitutes in a room to be killed by Frank, because that is his worst possible day.
Yeah.
No, I if they do season 3, I think that would be a fantastic idea, because it would really, it would be a real interesting struggle for him. I like the way that he's broken enough, because if he wasn't as broken as he is by the end of this episode, he would have gone through the cops. He would have escaped.
Maybe.
He wouldn't let himself be captured again.
Maybe.
Yeah. Just interesting.
Yeah. That's it. That's our top 5 points for this episode, guys. Couple of notes, I think, for the episode, John?
Definitely. This was a boozy episode as well, I found. What was really nice, the red wine that was being poured very liberally by Dr. Dumont in her apartment was labelled Decoy. The brand was Decoy,
I like that.
which was quite a nice little bit of yin and yang, I think, going on there in respect to that label on the red wine.
Yeah, that's definitely a production design choice, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
This woman's a decoy. Don't pay any attention to what she's saying.
That Minden Bourbon is still traveling around New York. It's now at Robbie John the Pilgrim in Black's dive of a hotel room.
Way too many names.
Yeah, too many names. Like you said, Chris, what do we call this guy? So I that's his new name. He's Robbie John the Pilgrim in Black. But yeah, it's now at his dive of a hotel room. And of course, at the next door room in the same hotel, we kind of have fellatio hooch here from Bob Wick's party. And it seemingly does make you see dead people, or near-death people.
Interesting.
This was the bottle of hooch. Couldn't grasp the brand that the Pilgrim was holding whilst he was being serviced in the hotel room.
Interesting. Fellatio hooch, you say?
Bourbon. It looked like a whiskey, but couldn't quite get the label.
Yeah, interesting one. Only other one that I caught for this episode was just the song that's playing at the end. Fortunate Son. The original was by Creedence Clearwater Revival, a very popular song back in the 70s. May have heard it in a number of films based around Vietnam War. Obviously, the character of Frank Castle was originally created during the Vietnam War, so some kind of connection there. But what's really interesting, I suppose, if you're conscious of how they use music in these shows, like actual songs as opposed to the score for these episodes, you get to the lines that are being sung in the song Fortunate Son, and It Ain't Me is the lines that are being sang as Curtis is with the body of Philip as he dies, and as Frank walks into the room to discover the three women dead, possibly at his hand. The lines of the song that are repeating are It Ain't Me, so it's effectively saying this is something that's completely against their character. So nice little touch there in the episode.
Excellent stuff.
One last note comes from one of our listeners. A piece of feedback that we received for this episode comes from Daniel Shields. I just thought it was interesting. We're on episode 10. We're hearing loads of names for the character of the Pilgrim, and Daniel Shields has a little bit extra of information to pass on to us. He says, "Hi, gentlemen. I wanted to pass on some information that I came across. I know that you speculated that the Pilgrim was an original character created for the show. It appears he's actually based on a character called the Mennonite. He was created within the last 10 years and appears to have only lasted for about 3 issues of the comics. Like Pilgrim, Mennonite is deeply religious, has a terribly sick wife and 2 sons. It's pretty cool that they dig up such an obscure character for this series. Keep up the great work, gentlemen. Regards, Dan Shields." Thanks so much for that, Dan. Yeah, and it really interesting when I had to look this up afterwards just to see exactly what Dan was talking about. The character is a Mennonite, but has never actually been given a name in the comic books. It is a Christian religion, but is mostly based on born-again Christians, people reneging their past and joining the religion. So that would really patch in quite well with John Pilgrim in this series, that he is possibly a Mennonite, possibly that is the religion that he's part of. We may see some of that in the future, but I suppose the character was never fully named in the book. That does happen quite a lot with characters that come in and out of comic books for 1 or 2 issues. So yeah, it's really interesting that they did possibly dig up this character from a very short run in the book.
Yeah, thanks, Dan, for that. It's really good stuff. I now have to call him Robbie John the Pilgrim in Black Mennonite.
There you go. Yeah. And one of the one that we've never actually mentioned, Amy, the character, we did eventually get her named as Amy. That's her real name. In the comic books, there is a character also called Amy, who was a 12-year-old girl that the Punisher helped out, who was caught in the crossfire of a battle that Punisher was having. So she is a character from the books, aged up obviously quite a lot. I think the story ends with the Punisher giving her back her doll's house. Can't really see this Amy caring about a doll's house, unless it's full of a lot of money that she might have stored in it, maybe.
Little marshmallowy Frank bringing back My Little Pony.
So very different character, but yes, no, she's also based on a comic book character, very, very marginally. It feels like what we're seeing with the Punisher. We've mentioned it before. While obviously the character is a Marvel comic book character, and while obviously this character has appeared more in the Max series of books than the Marvel regular comic series. That's why he doesn't interact much with the other characters. It doesn't feel like they needed to go back very often to Marvel to ask for approval to use the characters that they're using in the show. I don't think they're taking too much guidance from the comics side of things to create characters for the show, but at least there's some little touches in there.
Yeah, so for example, the Mennonite was in Punisher Max 3 and was dead by Punisher Max 5.
Yeah.
No, well, I've kind of got the A-Team thing going around in my head now, where it's kind of like, if you've lost your toys and no one else can help, call the P-Team.
The P-Team sounds bad. I'm just going to say that Punisher needs some marketing branding kind of help there. But,
Let's go for the Punisher team, definitely. Yeah. Guys, I think that's it for our notes and for our bullet points for the episode. Chris, do you defend The Punisher Season 2, Episode 10, The Dark Hearts of Men?
I do defend this episode, and I also just want to say I also defended the previous episode too. So this has been a tough season, I'm not going to lie. It's kind of dragged in certain areas, and as I said, I've actually gave my first ever not defense this season as well, earlier this season. It's picking up again, and especially because you brought in Steve Lightfoot, you brought in Alex Garcia-Lopez. Like, this was always going to be a winning combination. And I'm not saying Angela Lamanna didn't do anything. I'm saying, like, this was a lovely team that really brought out a fantastic episode. And you see this episode was both action-filled, but also highly dramatic from a character progression point of view.
Yeah.
So I do defend this episode. I still worry. And I can't...
Don't, Chris.
Sorry?
Don't worry, Chris.
I
Don't
know,
worry, Chris.
I know, but I have to. We've only got 3 hours left. We've got 3 hours of this season.
That's an extended Lord of the Rings.
I know. But based on the pace that they're going, I don't know what will happen.
Did you see the pace of the Lord of the Rings?
Oh, that's true. Okay. We've got at least one fellowship worth of a movie content here. Did you see? Yeah, they could have definitely, easily kind of finished that whole journey just by hopping on the back of those eagles. One does not simply walk to Mordor. One can simply fly.
You are not a book reader, Chris. They are not the taxi service of Middle-earth, as everybody seems to think they are.
But anyway, I'm scared for... and as we said at the beginning, I think this was potentially Steve Lightfoot coming in going, no, we've gone slightly off track here. We need to rein it back in. Because usually they're in for the first 2 episodes and they're back for the end.
He is the showrunner. I don't want to play down the experience of Steve Lightfoot. His job is to be in the writer's room at all times, but most of the writers go home to their home office, write their episodes and come back, and it gets kind of broken by the rest of the team. They point out what needs to be changed and tie it in with the other episodes, that kind of stuff. Steve Lightfoot is responsible for all the episodes. I think my question is, I'm wondering if he just wrote the John Pilgrim scenes and put them into this episode and the last episode, and I gave him credit for putting John Pilgrim back in, because they're not connected to anything else in the episode. And in fact, like they did with the other 6 episodes, they could just leave John Pilgrim out completely and it wouldn't affect the other stories, because he's not interacting with anybody else in the show. It feels like maybe Steve Lightfoot was like, guys, we're supposed to be barreling towards the end of a series here and you haven't even talked about my bad guy for 6 episodes.
Yeah, and that's my issue. That is 100% my issue, in that we are 3 episodes towards the final curtain, and we still barely know anything about the gay son, the actual Schultzes as a whole, aside from that they're a mega corporation. It's the whole thing. So I'm just like, all right, I defend this episode because this episode was fantastic. But Frank's now in custody. We've got to spend a whole episode of him getting out of custody. And then we've got 2 episodes left. I'm like, one of those episodes is him killing Billy. And then one episode is him killing the man in black, Pilgrim, Mennonite, John Wick, whatever. Like, I'm going to give him every name under the sun. Robbie, there we go. That's an episode there. So that's your 3 hours. So we're barreling to the end, and there's not that much time, and there's a lot of story. We need to know a lot more about the Schultz, their gay son, the mayorship, the presidential campaign that they're trying to run. All of that needs to still be explained. And I worry that, as I said, we're barreling towards the end, and there may not be enough time. We may end up losing some story to the side of the train because we've got no more track left. I'm just putting in every analogy I can to say I'm worried, people. But I really defended this episode because it was really good. So on that bombshell, well, it's not really a bombshell, more of a pop. It's like a ooh. Okay, there you go. That was like a little firework, wee pop. On that note, John, do you defend this episode of The Punisher?
Yes, I absolutely defend this episode of The Punisher. I give it 5 forehead dentures out of 5. And I think they do like a neat little sort of Stonehenge on his forehead as well, sort of the 5 teeth that have been embedded into his his skull. For me, this is standout episode so far, and I think that is in part down to the vision of the director. It's really interesting. I don't normally kind of latch onto directors in TV in the same way that I do with film for whatever reason. Maybe it's just the time when, you know, as a young teenager, I was watching TV. I just didn't really think of the directors. But here, Alex Garcia Lopez has really just sort of barreled into my eyesight, really, through Daredevil, because I just think it's a really interesting take. To me, this episode felt really complex, really intriguing, and really kind of giving those nods and moments to and the relationships with the characters, even if they are sort of not in a scene together. I loved how it was interwoven, both from the fight scene with the Pilgrim to his recovery and him trying to fix himself back up, to Dumont and Madani having this kind of face-off and discussion about who is most deserving of being given a break, effectively. Is it Frank or is it Billy? And ultimately how that then is used by Billy to employ his strategy to turn around this assault on Valhalla by Curtis and Frank. And then you have that rooftop scene with Curtis and Frank where you know, they talk about being life in the army, who you have your back for when you're in the heat of battle and when you're back as a civilian. Yeah. Really, really nice. And this all just kind of linked together so well for me. And I think all parts of it I really, really enjoyed. So I absolutely defend this episode, and I give it a whopping 5 out of 5 for sure.
A really high rating for the episode, John.
Yeah, absolutely. So, absolutely love this episode. So, Derek, do you defend this episode of The Punisher?
Oh, absolutely. Everything here was fantastic. The direction, as you said, the writing was great. The performances that are on screen here from everybody, from Madani and Dumont to obviously Billy and Frank and to Curtis, all of our major characters here, fantastic. John Pilgrim's whole moments that he has, brilliant, really, really good to see on screen. So much stuff here that I've wanted to see for 3 or 4 episodes. And I love when a director can come in and point out exactly what I was talking about. As you said, Chris, as well, that fight sequence being just as brutal and violent as the Russian fight sequence, but measured and built and filmed and put on screen so much better than that gym scene, which just seemed to focus on the torture porn that was in there for people that love watching torture porn movies. This elevates the show. It's saying exactly the same thing, but just using your camera properly, saying the same thing, but using your writing properly, saying the same thing, but using the same stunt coordinator. You know, everything is the same. It's a TV show. It's not a sequel to another movie, but he's elevating the Punisher by his appearance here, and the writing is obviously wonderful as well. So great episode overall. Really, really enjoyed it. I think that's probably the high point of the series so far. I'm hoping that they can go out on a high the next 3 episodes. We don't have anything to worry about. I hope that it does answer the questions that we want answered and end off in a big, wonderful moment for our characters at the end of this season. And I think this episode has kind of brought me back to the show completely. I'm really on board, really looking forward to the next couple of episodes. We are trying to fit in a bunch of recordings for our podcast to close out the season of The Punisher and make sure that we keep 2 episodes going out each week as we get towards the end of the series. We will be back next week with episode 11 of season 2 of The Punisher, The Abyss. We are going away, which means that we may not have it out on Tuesday like we normally do. We return on Tuesday, so it may be a little bit later on in the week, but we will definitely get our review of episode 11 coming out very soon to you. As well, as I say, we are trying to fit in loads of our recordings, so our feedback is kind of lagging a little bit behind. We're not getting as much time to put out our spoiler posts on the Facebook group before we run. Any thoughts that you have on any of the episodes for the rest of the season to us at feedback@defenderstvpodcast.com, or pop onto our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/defenderstvpodcast and let us know your thoughts on the series. We really want to hear from you as the rest of the season goes on. And we have a piece of feedback from Kristen Hall on this episode 10. She says, well, that was hard to watch. I watched through my shirt for more than half of that episode. Brutal, unforgiving, sadistic, right down to Krista. She is off her rocker. What do you guys think? Did Billy kill those women or did Frank? I had a really hard time with Pilgrim and the way he slid back into his old habits. It made me feel really uncomfortable. This episode was a really difficult one for me. Thanks so much, Kristen. I did respond on our Facebook group to Kristen's comments about this particular episode. I know she's continued on through the rest of the episodes as well. But as we spoke about earlier on in this episode, I felt the director on this particular one, the shots that he chose felt fine to me. I didn't feel like they were the ones that were glorifying the violence as such. I felt like he was choosing shots to show that it was brutal and sadistic, but not showing sadistic and brutal shots, if that makes sense. So for me, it was kind of illustrated my point that I was talking about earlier on in the season, where we were seeing a bit of the gorehound mentality as opposed to a director that knows how to use the scene and the shots well to get across the violence without actually showing it on screen. But I can totally understand that's, again, probably much more of a personal preference.
Yeah, thanks, Kristen. I really, in a strange way, I really hope that Billy didn't kill the women and it was Frank. I must say, I really do hope that, as this kind of evil mastermind, probably the mastermind of Krista, that they're playing this in a complete way, that they need to have Frank to have shot these women and not Billy. But we'll find out, I suppose, on the next episode. Yeah, and in relation to the Pilgrim, I think, I must say, I really loved how the fight scene cut back to him kind of recovering or trying to patch himself up. But I do think it is part of the, that old saying that old habits die hard. And confronted with his former neo-Nazi colleagues, he's back on the booze and the drugs, to help sort of mend and heal his soul. Yeah. Not what Eliza and Anderson Schultz would want, I suspect.
Probably not.
Yeah.
No. Thanks so much for the feedback, Kristen.
Yes, and remember, you can subscribe at any punishing or pacifist podcast catcher over at defenderstvpodcast.com. We're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and Google Podcasts, amongst many. And remember to rate us or leave a review. To share the podcast is to share the love.
Thanks so much for joining us, fellow defenders. Talk to you next time.
Thank you so much, people. And remember, if you're having a bad day, apparently some whiskey and a whore can make everything better.
Thank you so much for listening, fellow defenders. As always, it's been a pleasure. I'm off to get my book signed by Bob Wicks. Hopefully he's there, but if not, it may be signed in his own blood. I suppose it depends whether he survived the Pilgrim. But once I'm back with a signed book, we will be back to speak with you again soon. Bye.
I hear a lot of people saying the blues, but I'm gonna tell you what the blues is. When you ain't got no money, you got the blues. When you ain't got no money.
Yes, the books are self-help books from Bob Wick, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, chicken soul for the soup, or in this case, cocaine for the nose.
Try that one more time, Chris.
What did I say?
Chicken soul for the soup.
Oh my god. Yeah, chicken soup for the soul, or in this case, lots of cocaine for the nose.
And later you see Pilgrim sitting on the bed, having gotten some servicing from one of the
Prostitutes.
Jesus, Derek, use your words.
Ladies of the night, loose women, hussy.
Like Pilgrim, Mennonite is deeply religious, has a terribly sick wife and 2 sons. Pretty cool they dick up. Oops. It's pretty cool they dick up such an. I said it again. It's the job in this episode, obviously. It's pretty cool. It's pretty cool they dig up such an obscure character for this series. That does happen quite a lot with characters that come in and out of comic books for 1 or 2 issues. So it's really interesting that they did dig up.
Dig up. And I think really, yeah, it's the well-known saying, old dabbit.
It's a really well-known saying.
Old dabbits, high dive.